Good morning, students. Welcome to the IGCSE online sessions. I'm Mr. Charles, and this is the fifth lesson of week number 7. Please go to your coursebook, page 187, Literature Extension, an excerpt entitled The Great Frost from a story entitled Orlando by Virginia Woolf. Let's read together. The Great Frost was, historians tell us, the most severe that has ever visited these islands. Birds froze in midair and fell like stones to the ground. At Norwich, a young countrywoman started to cross the road in her usual robust health and was seen by onlookers to turn visibly to powder and be blown in a puff of dust over the roofs as the icy blast struck her at the street corner. The mortality among sheep and cattle was enormous. Corpses froze and could not be drawn from the sheets. It was no uncommon sight to come upon a whole herd frozen, immovable, upon the road. The fields were full of shepherds, ploughmen, teams of horses, and little bird-scaring boys, all struck stark in the act of the moment. One with his hand to his nose, another with a bottle to his lips, a third with a stone raised to throw at the raven who sat as if stuffed upon the hedge within a yard of him. The severity of the frost was so extraordinary that a kind of petrification sometimes ensued, and it was commonly supposed that the great increase of rocks in some parts of Derbyshire was due to no eruption, for there was none, but to the solidification of unfortunate wayfarers who had been turned literally to stone where they stood. The church could give little help in the matter, and though some landowners had these relics blessed, the most part preferred to use them either as landmarks, scratching posts for sheep, or, when the form of the stone allowed, drinking troughs for cattle, which purposes they serve admirably for the most part to this day. But while country people suffered the extremity of want, and the trade of the country was at standstill, London enjoyed a carnival of the utmost brilliancy. The court was at Greenwich, and the new king seized the opportunity that his coronation gave him to curry favor with his citizens. He directed that the river, which was frozen to a depth of 20 feet and more for about 6 or 7 miles on either side, should be swept, decorated, and given all the semblance of a park or pleasure ground with arbors, mazes, alleys, and drinking booths, etc., at his expense. Text analysis. The Great Frost between 1560 and 1660. There was a period now known as the Little Ice Age, and it particularly affected Northern Europe. The extract that we have read is about the effects of weather conditions in England in the early 17th century. Your assignment now, it should take you about 15 to 20 minutes. Pause the video, try to answer questions 1 and 2 of the box on top. That is, identify words and phrases that suggest this is an informative account for nonfiction, and words and phrases that should suggest this descriptive word for fiction. So basically, you have to identify fiction elements and non-fiction elements, informative non-fiction and descriptive fiction. The difference between fiction and non-fiction, as per the videos watched earlier, is that fiction cannot be happening, while non-fiction is something that happened based on truth. Fiction is something of fantasy, of very much emotive, but non-fiction is basing on real people, real places, real events in history, real names of rivers, for example. Take 15 to 20 minutes, try to extract these, and then come back to the video. The non-fiction informative elements is that first, it has reference to the trade in London. This is very much a real thing, and it is still practiced from the dawn of men until the end of time. Trade, and London also is a real place. The extremity of want. This phrase in the countryside, this phrase suggests that how much people demanded stuff that were of limited access in this or in that horrible weather conditions. The king's recent coronation, how the king or the ceremony in which the king becomes a king or the candidate becomes a king, this is called coronation. A coronation is something very much real, and the king as well. The river Thames was frozen. This is also a historical fact. First, that there is in fact a river called Thames, and in fact it was frozen in this so-called Little Ice Age. How it is fiction, on the other hand, how it is descriptive fiction? Well, from the question requirement, descriptive, there is a lot of figurative language used. The woman turned visibly to powder. This is fantasy. This is definitely non-fiction, unless Thanos wrote this story. But a woman or any person cannot turn to dust immediately or to powder, and especially from cold, for example. Wayfarers were petrified and turned into landmarks. This also looks like escaping from a fantasy story where people are becoming stones. Petrification is the turning of people into stones, into statues. And statues are not really people. I don't mean to scare you off, but they are carves of marble, they are carves of actual stone. But no single person was set and then in the street, and let's say he was put stones around him to make him like a statue. No. But this what the writer, what Virginia Woolf says, that people were turned into stones and then landmarks because of how cold this is. This is hyperbole. These are either hyperbole or allegory or simile, personification, metaphor. All of this figurative language is to increase the descriptive fiction effect. For birds to fall like stone, this is highly unlikely, unless in our times we see something of this for the effect of global warming, let's say, or the shift of the magnetic field of the earth, and birds lose their natural compass. But this is highly unlikely to have occurred in those times. That's why it is of fictional classification. If you found any other answers, just make sure you don't have to stick to these. Just make sure that you categorize them in the proper or appropriate category. Do not choose something that is in fact a name of a place or in fact a real incident that happened. Do not put it in the fiction section, and do not put, let's say, birds falling from the sky as stones into non-fiction section. We're done for today. Thank you very much for listening. Stay safe and keep up the good work.